India was ruled by the Brits for a long time, but they had been there for a long time. And following World War II, the Brits decided to leave India, to evacuate these, what was effectively too large to handle. The estate was too large for them to manage. They had to focus on their own nation building and couldn't manage this huge estate. So they decided to evacuate, and in leaving India, they decide to find a way to separate the communities, to kind of partition India. It was a motion that some Muslim organizations were calling for. They wanted a partition. Others didn't want a partition, but this was something that was ripe and timely to actually happen. So when they were leaving India, they left a huge void. So before 1947, they left in 47, following World War II. There was a unified territory, all under the British Raj, or the British administration. In 47, they decided to leave. Mountbatten was the guy in charge at the time. So they decided to divide the territories. So some of the Muslims, who at the time were approximately 25% of the population in India, this unified India, a quarter of that population were Muslims, some Muslim thinkers were for the idea that we should remain in India because we are a significant group, a quarter. We should remain here. Let's keep India united and let's work within the framework of this united nation. Okay? Others said, no, we need to move out. We're a minority. 3/4 are not Muslim. And when Britain leaves, we're going to be oppressed. We're already seeing signs of that oppression coming. So we need to find our own homeland. We need to move. We need to partition. So between 46, 47, the discussion is being had amongst many intellectuals, many leaders. But eventually, when the British leave in 47, there is a decision made to separate, to have a two-state, two-nation partition. And many people had things to say about this. Some were for it, others against it. But one of the most, you could say, memorable critique of the partition movement from the Muslim perspective was a very famous intellectual, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, who later on becomes the Minister of Education in India. So he was against partition. He wanted the Indian Muslims to remain in India and to work within the framework of India, not to separate. So in 1946, as Muhammad Ali Jinnah was going to present his proposal, and there was negotiation happening in the council, they were negotiating this. Jinnah wanted to get the separation, others didn't want it. For example, you had Mahatma Gandhi, didn't want partition. He wanted them to remain as one nation. So these negotiations were happening. In the back end, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was given an interview. It's a very famous incident actually, where he was questioned about his perspective on this division. Is it a good or a bad thing? Now, Abul Kalam was born in Mecca. He was born to a religious family. His father was a scholar. There were also Sayyid, Ashraf. And he was somebody who knew Arabic fluently. He had lived in Mecca. He went back to India later on in life. He was a scholar, very intelligent. If you look at his biography, very intelligent, very, very amazing. He was a prodigy. He married at 13. In those days, manhood came a bit earlier. People were a bit more mature. For a 13-year-old to have a relationship as a husband, to be responsible for a household at 13. But by that time already, he was writing books. He was already teaching people. By 15, he was teaching adults. He had written books. He had his own library service. He set up a library. He was translating works. He was commenting on Al-Ghazali, subhanallah, 15. Right? So he was a man whose educational acumen was astonishing, a genius. He spoke several languages as well. Several languages. So he, with his knowledge and insight, was against partition. And so when he was interviewed in the Chatham newspaper in Lahore, 46, they questioned him about the two communities in India. Is there any hope that when the British leave India, these two communities, i.e. Muslim, 25% roughly, and the rest, Sikh, Hindu, Jain, would be able to remain united under one nation, one banner? And so he says in response that separation is not going to solve any issues. I want you to take this as a template for the current discussion being had concerning Palestine, the two states proposal, or at least what used to be a proposal. I don't think it's there anymore, but what was once upon a time a proposal. I don't think the Israelis want a two-state nation anymore. They want everything. But is separation a solution for these conflicts? His answer is very insightful. He says no. Just creating Pakistan will not solve our problems. We have deeply rooted issues in our society, and just sectioning one segment of the land for Pakistan, for Muslims, will not solve our problems. Our objective, and today, by the way, to this very day, when you speak to Muslims in India, they have similar ideas, and I believe both perspectives are right. They're both right in their own sense. But he's saying that our objective is to make da'wah. We're supposed to spread Islam. We're supposed to go out and mix with other people and spread and interact with them so they can see the beauty of Islam. We are a people who are here to promote Islam. But if we were to have separate nations, we're blocking that exchange. Okay? If Muslims go to their own land and the non-Muslims remain in their own land, there's no interaction anymore. The purpose of da'wah is lost. We don't achieve anything by separating. And then he also goes on to say that the Muslim politicians at the time, for example, Ali Jinnah, are very confrontational. Rather than negotiating and finding ways of being more diplomatic about the terms of division, if you're going to divide, they're very confrontational. Right? And this does not help. Furthermore, there were collaborative efforts. There were meetings made with the British as well to lobby them for this to go through, because we want a separate land for the Muslims. So he's critiquing that decision making, that working with the British is not a good idea, and being confrontational is not a good idea in times such as these. You can't be confrontational. Be a bit more cooperative, a bit more diplomatic. Don't create enemies where you don't have to have enemies. Yeah? So he says, had this not been the case, then potentially the Muslims could have remained in India and the population could have been even bigger. And again, you have people saying today, it's a valid criticism, a valid point. The only reason why Muslims in India are oppressed is because the majority of them had left. So those who remain in India have now become a smaller population. Whereas if we had all stayed in the same place, we would have been a bigger force to reckon with. We would have been stronger as a unit. Right? That's one argument. So he's presenting that argument that if we just stay in India, over time, we will become a bigger population. But if we separate now, we are making ourselves weaker and divided. I don't know whether you agree with that argument or not, but it was an argument made. And the same argument, by the way, in America at the time was being made. The Nation of Islam was also arguing for separation. They wanted a separate state. In the same way they saw the Jews have a separate state in 1948, they were also arguing we want a separate state. We want to have a difference, a separation of land between the blacks and the whites. Malcolm X was for it at the time, before he became Sunni Muslim. They wanted a separate state, right? Others were not for it. They said, no, let's integrate. Martin Luther King, for example, he was to integrate the societies. Others said, let's separate the societies. To this very day, there is still discussion back and forth. Who was right? Was integration a mistake? Who was right? The same happens in Pakistan. To this very day, who was right? Was Pakistan a good idea? Did we have to do it? Because if we didn't do it, we would have been massacred. Or have we made ourselves even weaker now because we've separated? So he was of that persuasion. Then they ask him, Muslims are Muslims ready to live with people of different faiths? Now that the British have left and we are here by ourselves, is the Muslim community willing to integrate? And this discussion also, again, is taking place in the West, for example. Are Muslims in the West willing to integrate? Are they willing to join the natives and share the same civic duties and beliefs? His answer is, again, very insightful. He says, freedom of faith is the right of every citizen, and it cannot be set in stone based purely on religion. We can coexist, and everyone has the right to have their own religion. We don't have to have separation of Muslims here, Sikhs over there, Hindus there. We all have the right to practice our faith the way we see it. Right? And it's a right that we all have as citizens of one nation. Then he goes on to criticize the Muslim community. He says, the community, the Muslims themselves are divided. The Muslims themselves are deeply divided to begin with. So when you add further division, you're only making the problem worse. We're already divided. He mentioned the issue of Shia Sunni. Look how timely it is when we look at the issue of Palestine and Lebanon today, and Syria, and Iran. Some people saying, let's just all join and hold hands for now, okay? Let's deal with this issue of Israel. And later on, others are saying, never. We will never stand with Shia or Sunni. We will never stand with Ikhwan. We will never stand with these Wahhabis. We will never work together to fight Israel because the greater enemy is the one inside Islam. These are the greater enemy. So we are so fragmented internally, we can't externally make any positive impact. So he's saying, even in Pakistan, this so-called Pakistan, the Muslims will remain segregated and the sectarian bias will still be strong. Even if they have a separate country, it will still be segmented. So he talks of Sunnis, Shias, the different schools of Tasawwuf, the different madhahib. He gives examples such as, for example, do you say Ameen in Salah or not? Some say you say Ameen aloud, some say no. So he's giving examples. Then he goes on to say that our ulama are busy making takfir of one another. Look at Twitter. Look at Twitter, right? Rather than focus on the bigger enemy, we're making takfir of one another. So they're busy making takfir of one another. And he says we're more eager to make takfir of the next Muslim than to invite the non-Muslim to Islam. He makes a very beautiful statement. He says, we used to be a people who used to invite people to Islam. Now we are people who kick Muslims out of Islam, the anti-da'wah. So his assessment is that the Muslim community is not even united to begin with. In its own circle, it's not united, let alone unification on a wider scale. Right? So he's criticizing the whole project. He's against it. Then he goes on to his question. So why are you and other prominent Muslims, because there are many others who are very prominent, Abu al-Hasan al-Nadwi being another example, and also Tabligh Jam, many people were against it. Abu al-A'la al-Mawdudi, many people were against the idea of let's have a separate state. They didn't believe it was going to work. Not because they didn't want to have a separate, but because they didn't believe it was the time, it wasn't going to work. And the people in charge of that project, they did not trust them. They were politicians, businessmen. They didn't trust their sincerity, which is why when Pakistan eventually is established in 1947, Abu al-A'la has his own organization established to hold them accountable, to remind them, you created this nation on the basis of La ilaha illallah. So we're going to hold you accountable. Okay? So he says so his question, why are prominent Muslims in India opposed to this? What's the problem? What are you worried about? Is it not a good idea that you have one nation so you can all be united under one nation? So now he gives some very interesting responses. Very interesting. He says, firstly, that would cause a huge population shift. Because in order for us to have a separate land for the Muslims and a separate land for everybody else, we need to make sure that the population that's residing in what's now Pakistan has to move out of Pakistan into India. And the Muslims in India have to evacuate and go to Pakistan. And even if all people were to leave, all Muslims were to leave India to go to Pakistan, there's not enough space. There would still be 30 million Muslims left in India who will not have a space in Pakistan. So from his perspective, logically speaking, logistically speaking, there's not enough space. It's not practical. And also moving millions of people around, back and forth, is not practical.
The rains come to India. It's the monsoon season. Fields are flooded, rivers overflow their banks. And all the time, the bloodshed goes on. As the new dominions of Pakistan and India take over their own affairs, communal hatred flares up in the Punjab. Fleeing from their looted, blood-stained towns comes a new exodus, amid horror and mourning. Throughout this vast land, Hindus and Muslims seek safety in new surroundings. Peace-loving people, theirs is the real tragedy. The fortunate few flee in army transports or in buses. For the masses, it's the weary trail of the road. Carrying their few possessions, They flee from savagery and butchery that has never been exceeded even in India's stormy history. 1 million people become refugees overnight.
But then he goes, but if it does happen, and this is where his prediction comes into place. He says, if it does happen, and Muhammad Ali Jinnah's request is granted, and there is a Pakistan, there is a two-nation split in 47, one of three things can happen to the Muslims. One of three things. Number one, they leave and take the route to Pakistan, which many people died on the way, by the way. It's very perilous. So they take that huge risk of leaving everything they know, their families, their wealth, everything they know, their homes, to travel to a new land. And on the way there, they could be killed. So that in itself is a problem. Or they can remain in India, but they will be suffering the brunt of the backlash, because if the Muslims are leaving to go to another land, and Hindus and Sikhs are coming to this land, there's going to be a bit of resentment, okay? Especially given the fact that the Indian, by and large, not all of them, but the establishment didn't want the separation. So they will take it out on those who remain in India. So that Muslim minority now in India, who's been weakened in numbers, will be subject to more discrimination, to more oppression. And finally, those who can't sustain that oppression and that tyranny may have to become Hindu, may have to convert out of Islam, out of preservation, to become Hindu. Okay, so the situation for him was bleak on all sides. It wasn't a good idea. Okay, the best situation was to remain in India as a bloc and to keep giving da'wah and to grow eventually. He was the education minister, for example. Right? You had Abu al-Hasan al-Nadwi, rahimahullah, who was also very well favored in the establishment in India, respected. So working within the establishment for him was a better option than just separating. And then he goes on to mention the final point, and this is very, 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 very astute observation, because India at the time was in between what was now going to be two flanks of Muslim territory. You had in the western flank what is now Pakistan, and on the eastern flank what would then become Bangladesh. So he observed that the distance between these two nations, about 2,000 kilometers, they are not going to remain loyal to one another. They're not going to remain unified. Once Jinnah and Liaquat Ali Khan, the president and prime minister of Pakistan, leave, or when they die, the entire unification will crumble. And you're going to find that these two nations, or these two parts of Pakistan, are going to go against one another. They're going to start fighting one another. So he predicted that in 46. And as far as he was concerned, it was a road to nowhere. So finally, a question is raised. And the interviewer says, why are Muslims so irrational, so unreasonable? Okay, why this? Because what we see of them, we have an impression that they're not rational people. What is it about Muslims that makes them so just emotional in terms of these sorts of discussions and debates? So he says, because of the misplaced enthusiasm of a mob. So being in places where people are all screaming, protesting, shouting slogans, that removes the critical ability for most people. You become just a part, a wheel in a cog. You lose your ability to think properly. So the mob mentality and placing enthusiasm in that. So in other words, we're calling one another to mass movements and revolutions rather than calling each other to enlightenment, to deep thinking. We're calling each other to movements and mass kind of mob mentality movements. So it goes, placing emphasis on that is one of the reasons. But also when people lose confidence and self-respect, when a people are humiliated, subdued, and they no longer feel important in the world. Ibn Khaldun mentions this, by the way, in the Muqaddimah, that when the people are subjugated for long enough, they turn on one another and they develop certain characteristics that are lowly. Okay? So he says, when people lose confidence and self-respect, they are engulfed by imaginary doubts and dangers. So they begin to make enemies where enemies are not necessarily there. They begin to feel embattled as a community. They begin to feel victimized. And that creates a very warped perspective about what's right and what's wrong. So we begin to justify the unjustifiable actions of certain people. And we begin to maybe attack perspectives that may necessarily not be anti-Islamic, but may not be what we want to hear in the moment. So he goes, that environment creates a level of clouded thinking, effectively. The true meaning of life is realized not through numerical strength. Again, it's not a matter of having the largest number of people protesting. That's not where the objective should be. But through firm faith, taqwa internally, and righteous actions, subhanallah. 46. This man was a genius, a visionary, a luminary. It's not about having the biggest march, screaming and waving flags. It's about, are you as an individual unit of the ummah? Are you living Islam? Is your taqwa in place? Are you making righteous actions? Are you praying on time? We're going to have to go and pray, by the way. Are you praying? Are you honoring Islam? Are you doing the right things individually in your life? That's where change begins. The true meaning of change in life is in doing these things, not in numerical displays of power and strength. If Muslim lives are in danger, partition will not remove the danger. Yeah, so he goes back to his initial point, saying that partition is not the solution, but rather it's going to cause more armed conflicts and many more lives will be lost. Yeah, he leaves it there. Now, whether you agree or not with his assessment of this situation, it's open. I mean, on the other side, you could also say that actually Muslims were being persecuted already. They had to move quickly, otherwise they'll be sitting ducks in India, and the repercussion will be severe. So there are both perspectives. They both have valid arguments. But this is one that really strikes. It resonates with what we're seeing today, how we react to certain things in the world. Okay, how we react. The infighting, the sectarianism, okay, the hostility. All of this he mentioned in 46. But there was also a fear, to play the angel's advocate, that now that the British left, the majority Hindu and non-Muslim population still remembered what the Muslims did when they ruled over them. And this was an opportunity to punish and to seek revenge. That's one of the arguments on the other side. They're going to seek revenge. They're going to seek revenge, right? They haven't forgotten. So if we remain sitting in this region, we are an open target. So we need to move before things get really bad. That's the argument on the other side. Yeah. We can be here for the entire day discussing, but it's very interesting. So eventually it goes through anyway. Okay, it goes through. Partition is done. What's important to note is that Pakistan, as an entity, is divided by 2,000 kilometers, approximately. So what happens is you have West Pakistan and you have East Pakistan. And this is one country, by the way. One country. India wasn't happy because what this meant was they had now a threat from two ends. They had to guard their borders on two opposite ends. Right? There is a clear issue of division of land and also resources as well between West Pakistan and East Pakistan. So what is now known as Bangladesh was in the eastern region, and what is now known as Pakistan was on the western region. Most of the main political players and the elite went to West Pakistan, and therefore the resources followed them to West Pakistan. Okay, so very early on, there was an imbalance in distribution of resources and emphasis in development. Would it be East Pakistan or West Pakistan? And those in East Pakistan, in Bangladesh or Bengal, had a few grievances. They had a few grievances. One of them being that in 1970, there was a cyclone that hit East Pakistan. And depending on who you speak to, some people say 300,000, others say millions. People died. And the people of East Pakistan felt that those in West Pakistan spent too long wavering. They didn't respond immediately. They were basically reluctant to help. And as a result of that, more people died. So in 1970, when this cyclone hits East Pakistan, Bangladesh, there is a great deal of dissatisfaction with the administration in West Pakistan, who were considered to be basically careless. They didn't really care about those who had suffered in East Pakistan. The details can be discussed and debated until the end of the session, but it was a contributing factor for what follows. So in the same year, 1970, we now have a political campaign, a political round, a political candidacy is open. And on both ends of Pakistan, you have two candidates, right? So you have Yahya Khan, the president there, Bhutto, prime minister, and you have here Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And on the eastern flank, or East Pakistan, Mujibur Rahman, whose organization was known as the Awami League, they get 75% of the votes. So they win by a landslide in East Pakistan. In West Pakistan, the Pakistan People's Party, Bhutto's party, wins. But they don't get many votes in East Pakistan. Likewise, nobody votes for any of the East Pakistan's Awami League to take any seats in West Pakistan. So there's a divide, politically speaking. But when you put the votes together and you look at the numbers, the clear winner, again, you're going to have discussions here as to whether that was true or not, but the majority winner was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So what that really meant was, if we follow the rules, he should be in power. And the Awami League should be in power. In Pakistan is one nation. However, the president of Pakistan, West Pakistan, decides to block it effectively. He doesn't allow the government to take power. And instead, he emphasizes a joint leadership, that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto and Mujibur Rahman should join forces and lead together and rule together. But that's not according to what the results gave. The results were that they won. Mujibur Rahman won, so he should be ruler. And so immediately, and again, this is just after the entire cyclone issue, so there's a bit of resentment from East Pakistan anyway. So now that they have their own candidate who's won the elections, again, discussions in the back end whether they won it or not, conflict begins. The division begins finally. The division begins. And so over the next couple of days, several messages are being sent publicly. So in West Pakistan, they are saying, we are going to maintain the government as it is, and we don't want to allow East Pakistan, who was now calling for independence. So Mujibur Rahman had called his people to rise up and to defend their own constitution and to defend their own land, to defend their own culture. Because, by the way, when Pakistan was established, the official language was Urdu. And the people of East Pakistan spoke Bengali. So their language was not recognized as an official state language. So that meant that even in East Pakistan, they had to speak Urdu. Now you can imagine what that would lead to in terms of the people's reaction to that. They felt also discriminated because those in West Pakistan were a bit fairer, whereas those in Bangladesh were a bit darker. So they felt there was racial motive as well. People were looking down on them. And also they felt that the resources were not being distributed properly. So the treasury was giving more money to West Pakistan for development there and withholding from East Pakistan. But East Pakistan was producing 57% of the GDP. So they felt they were being deprived of resources to develop their nation. So all of this put together is a perfect recipe for a independence struggle, effectively.
The bitterness of poverty and resentment in East Pakistan erupted today in a kind of civil war. Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the leader of East Pakistan, declared the region an independent republic, which he said will be called Bangladesh, the land of the Bengalis. Pakistan is a nation united only by religion. West Pakistan has the money and the government and the resources. East Pakistan, 1,000 miles away across India, has the poverty and the misery. It seems to get in the world news only when it sets a record for disaster, as it did last fall with the tidal wave that killed 200,000 people. Now West Pakistan, which also has most of the reaching the U.S. consulate in Dhaka, say that the army is using full force, including tanks, throughout the country. The revolt came after a final breakdown of talks for which Pakistan President Yahya Khan went to East Pakistan. The background of today's Declaration of Independence now from 𝐃𝐈𝐒𝐿 in Dhaka.
As far as the people of East Pakistan are concerned, the central issue has never been in doubt. They have been treated, they feel, as though their country were a colony of West Pakistan. In last December's general election, East Pakistan's Awami League won an absolute majority in the National Assembly. The Assembly was due to convene on March 3rd. It would draft a new constitution. Given a majority voice in the new Assembly, things would be different for East Pakistan. But the Assembly never met. Under pressure from West Pakistan's political leader, Ali Bhutto, President Yahya Khan postponed the assembly for 3 weeks. Under the leadership of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, the Bengalis took to the streets. The situation became so critical that President Yahya himself flew here to Dhaka to meet personally with the Sheikh. The meetings were so private that no antagonist was summoned from Karachi. Ali Bhutto arrived in Dhaka surrounded by machine gun-toting bodyguards. The hotel where he stayed became an armed camp, cordoned off by the army. The precautions were necessary. In a competition for the most hated man in East Pakistan, Ali Bhutto would win in a walk. Within 24 hours of Bhutto's arrival in Dhaka, President Yahya postponed the National Assembly yet again, this time indefinitely. The Bengalis used the occasion to proclaim a kind of de facto independence. To the crack of a 1.5 gun...
I know the extent of disaster, I know, but the mounting an operation of this size and magnitude requires time to build up.
There has been a great deal of criticism, President, about...
Well, I can't help people criticizing. The point is, my government and my people are at it the whole time. My job is to get on with the work and forget the criticism.
Are you happy, sir, that enough is being done?
I'm satisfied, and I'm going to satisfy myself more. If I'm not satisfied on this store, I shall then do something about it. But so far, they are doing their damnedest.
Why do you think there's so much criticism in East Pakistan, sir?
Well, how can I tell you that? Please, at this stage, I'm out to do a job of work. I'll tell you all about it when I come back from visit.
Was it a political thing, do you suppose?
I have no comments at this stage.
Are you happy, sir, that the international response has been a good one?
Extremely happy. I think it's been a magnificent response. It's really unprecedented in the world history, the way the world community has come to help us.
So Mujibur Rahman sets the wheels in motion. He calls his people to stand up for their own identity. Yahya Khan, who was supported by the Americans at the time, because the Americans wanted Pakistan to remain one unit for fear of the Russians entering the eastern flank and taking over this region. So they wanted to make sure by any cost there's no split in Pakistan. So Yahya Khan, he gives a lecture and he warns East Pakistan of this decision making. If you split, you're going to make life a living hell for the majority of people in this one Pakistan. You're dividing the nation. So they warn him against that. Bhutto also warns, you cannot split. But on the other end, if you don't allow us to lead the government, we've won the elections, we have to split. So the conflict begins, and eventually what happens is Mujibur Rahman is seized and sent to West Pakistan, where he's kept in prison. So in his imprisonment, of course, now the revolutionary spirit rises even more, because our leader has been taken in custody by those west of the Pakistani border. And now there is a real need for resistance. Initially, India did not get involved. So Indira Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister of India at the time, she wasn't involved. She wanted to remain neutral on the issue. But what happened is, unfortunately, because of the rising tension, there was a militia that was formed in East Pakistan, and they began to take action. So they began to defect from the West Pakistani army. They began to take action, and there was a new resistance unit. And that, of course, invites military assault from West Pakistan. Effectively, a war breaks out. And India is worrying about its own borders because they're stuck in between these two warring nations. Also, at the same time, 1 million refugees escaped from East Pakistan. So you have Bangladesh at the time was divided into West and East Bengal. East Bengal was what we now know as Bangladesh under the Muslims, and West Bengal was within Indian territory. But because of the warring, the conflict and killing, many of those who were not even Muslims were leaving West Bengal, and going to Calcutta, going to mainland India. By the point in which it became an issue, 1 million, there were 1 million refugees in India. So now India felt the need to get involved because they had 1 million people coming into India, whereas it was only 25 years ago they left. They had left to go to Pakistan, and now they're coming back. There is another 1 million coming back to India. And so they decided to get involved by firstly acknowledging East Pakistan. Firstly, acknowledging, saying, we recognize your statehood. That was level one. So Indira Gandhi recognizes the statehood of East Pakistan. She doesn't give them arms yet, but when Yahya Khan sends his army to attack, and India is involved and is being also targeted, she eventually mobilizes her army and begins to send arms to East Pakistan. And now it's a full alliance. They're now allied against West Pakistan. It's only been 20 years, 25 years, and already you're seeing that what used to be one Muslim bloc, you now have one of that bloc allying with India against the other Muslim bloc. Look how it turned around so quickly. So it's a long story, but in the end what happens is India and Bangladesh are also supported by the West and other people playing both cards. They eventually managed to get West Pakistan to surrender. And in December of 1971, Bangladesh's independence. So now it's now officially divided. There are two nations now. One is in East Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a nation, Republic of Bangladesh. And the other one is Pakistan, just Pakistan. So now there's another split. And India is in between that. Right? So that war of independence, many people lost their lives. There are many details people agree upon, disagree upon. How many people were killed? Was it 3 million as reported by Bangladesh? Or was it 300,000 people as reported by India? Were there rapes of women? Were there no rapes? Was there kidnapping? Was there torture? All of these details are discussed and debated to no end. But the point being, there was a huge casualty count. There were many people who were left stateless, had to move into India, for example, 1 million people. So it was a mess. But at the very end of it, there were two nations, and Pakistan had to learn to get along with Bangladesh. They had to learn to accept. Mujibur Rahman is sent back now to be the president. So he's released, and he goes back to his new nation now as a president. And we have now a division that was already predicted in 46. He already predicted it in 46. Yeah, within 25 years, only 25 years, it's a reality. We have a similar division when we find, for example, the division between West Bank and East and Gaza, between the PA and Hamas. It doesn't take long, unfortunately, for the divisions to happen. Is it a better thing that there's a division between West and East Pakistan? Some people say yes, because the Bengali population is being oppressed, was being neglected. So it's better that they have their own nation on the other side and they can run their own business and run their own economy. Others say no. You have now further weakened the body of the Muslims in India. What was 25% was now divided between India and Pakistan, and now even that is further divided. So you have weakened everyone as a result of that. Yeah. We are now weaker than we used to be before. So it wasn't a good decision. The story continues because eventually Mujibur Rahman is a president, but also Zulfikar Ali Bhutto becomes the leader of Pakistan. But it wouldn't be long before he is killed. He is executed on the orders of 𝐷𝐈𝐒𝐿, who charges him with murder. It's a trumped-up charge, effectively, to get rid of him. So he is soon killed. He's removed. His tenure doesn't last long. So following the war with Bangladesh, Yahya Khan, he basically resigns straight away. So Zulfikar Ali Bhutto becomes the next president, the next leader. So in 71, Bhutto becomes a leader. In 73, just 2 years later, there is a coup to remove him. So within Pakistan, there's a coup attempt to remove Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, just within 2 years. Doesn't even take long. Within 6 years, there's another coup, and this is by 𝐷𝐈𝐒𝐿. He eventually succeeds in toppling Ali Bhutto, and 2 years later, he executes him by hanging. So it doesn't last long. 8 years, he's removed altogether. So there is further division again. It's division after division after division. Yeah.
Of course, this is a split decision and very evenly balanced, 4-3. Do you think in these circumstances it is morally impossible for you to hang Mr. Bhutto?
Well, I would not personally like to comment on this as yet, because basically the case is still technically still under consideration of the court, is sub judice. And therefore any comment on me, whether on moral grounds or technical grounds, may likely to create unnecessary impressions in the mind of the public who are going to review this or view this. So I personally would say that it's not right for me to comment whether Mr. Bhutto can be morally hanged or cannot be morally hanged just because the verdict is split.
Do you regret that this prodigiously long trial was ever started?
No, not a bit. I may not have given anything at all to this country, but certainly I've given them one thing. I've given them the rule of law. And I've proved there's nobody high or low is above the law. That's number one. We have also shown how independent our judiciary is. And I have proven to the country that irrespective of any considerations, the rule of law must be obeyed and must be respected.
That happens. So in West Pakistan, you have a new government again. In East Pakistan, it's even bloodier. In Bangladesh, it's even bloodier. The recent Bengali or Bangladeshi revolution, the student revolution, has been met with a lot of fervor, a lot of excitement. I've kind of had to reserve my own. It's too early to tell. It's very early to tell. But if you look at the revolutionary wave in '71, when Mujibur Rahman became the leader of Bangladesh, it was a great thing. Yes, we finally got rid of the Pakistan, West Pakistan. We're now independent. We can now live and explore and enjoy. But unfortunately, 4 years later, he's also assassinated in his own home by members of his own army, who, again, a coup d'etat, and all his family is killed with him, except his two daughters. Hasina, Sheikh Hasina was in England at the time, so she wasn't there physically. So the assassination happens, he is killed. Does it end there? Of course it doesn't end there, because we know one coup leads to another coup, leads to another coup. So in '75, Khandakar Mushtaq Ahmed becomes the president. But in the same year, he's also removed. And another person becomes president. Abu Sadat Muhammad Saim becomes president. The one who removed Khandakar is also killed in the same year. It's a revolving door of assassinations, effectively. Okay, Zia Rahman becomes the next president. Zia Rahman, in the next 6 years, has 21 attempts on his life. 21 attempts on his life in 6 years. In '81, his time is up. He's assassinated. So there's a revolving door of coup d'etats, of assassinations, of coup d'etats. It never ends, effectively. Which is why when we see another revolution, it's not time to celebrate straight away. Give it a bit of time, because we've seen this before. So eventually we end up with who? Sheikh Hasina. We end up with her eventually. Yeah. So it's good to see that the history does repeat itself, unfortunately. And these coup d'etats and these separations, these divisions don't always end up in positive outcomes. You could imagine if Maulana Abul Kalam Azad were to witness all of these things and give another update as to what he thinks about it, it would be effectively just confirming what he said in '46. Okay? He hasn't resolved anything in the long term. Bhutto is hung and Mujibur Rahman is shot. So we have lost 2 of those people already within a few years.
Welcome to Historyun, the world's leading online learning platform specializing in Islamic history. Discover the Historyun mobile app and participate in regular live and interactive seminars and tune in directly from your handset from anywhere in the world. Enjoy instant access to a growing catalog of on-demand streaming content exclusive to the platform, accessible from a variety of devices including desktops, tablets, and cell phones. Connect instantly with our global community of history enthusiasts via our private community forum. To find out more about our online history programs and resources, visit our website today at www.historyun.com.